So once February rolls around, it's no secret that it's either feast or famine. Everybody knows the pre-spawn is starting to heat up in the south, down in Florida, and it's starting to creep its way up. We're getting a couple more warm days. Obviously, it's still ice where I'm at up here, but I do travel all over the country, and I want to talk about my top 5 favorite pre-spawn baits because, like I said, it can be feast or famine, and with these devastating cold fronts we still have rolling through and those little bit of warm days we have, everybody's starting to want to get their boats out on the water. So let's break down my top 5 favorite baits for the month of February right now. So the first bait we're going to talk about is one that's not going to be a secret to anybody, and that is going to be a jerkbait. There's probably no better bait to trigger fish with, and especially trigger fish in cold water with, than a jerkbait. I myself reach for a 6 cents 106 DD in that general range, but I like the Provoke series because I can get them to dive a little bit deeper, and the shallow one I can get a little bit shallower, so it's kind of the best of both worlds. But what is so good about a jerkbait other than how it just creates a reaction strike from the fish? A lot of times this time of year we get those cold days like I talked about, and during those cold days you need to be able to trigger those fish. You're starting to get some fish that are pushing shallower because they're seeing the warm days. The days are getting longer, importantly, and so you need to trigger those fish. The other major factor we have is bait fish are starting to also move shallower, and those fish are going to follow the bait fish shallower. So to trigger those bites and to imitate those bait fish, a jerkbait is key. And what it also does is it just gets you bites. We all know how tough it can be this time of year when you're not catching fish, so that is one of my top priorities. Is to catch big fish, you first have to be around them, and this is one of those baits that I can cover water with and just draw some strikes, because I'm not always going to catch a giant on this bait. In fact, as soon as I start catching some fish, I might put this bait down and never pick it back up again. But because it is so good at triggering bites, I can find the one dummy in the group that just throws me the flag and says, here I am. So that way I know those fish are there. And so that way I can use some of these other baits that I'm going to talk about to catch some of these bigger fish in here. But this is one of those baits that is going to get you bites, keep you focused, and most importantly, have you having fun on the water, which can suck this time of year because of some of the cold fronts that we get. So bait number 1 for me is going to be a jerkbait. For those of you guys that are new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to follow along and keep up with the content I have coming out every day. But let's dive in to bait number 2. Bait number 2 goes well with the jerkbait that I had just talked about, and that is going to be a swim bait, particularly a bigger than average size swim bait. We all know there's 2.2 Kitex and 3-inch swim baits and 4-inch swim baits, but one of the baits that I really love to throw is getting up into that 4.8 to the 5 to 6-inch swim baits this time of year, because this is a time of year when the fish are the biggest they are ever going to be in that given year. Those females have all those eggs inside of them, and a lot of times they're looking for a big meal to get ready for the spawn, because the spawn is a super stressful time, and especially the winter time is also a stressful time because those fish don't eat a lot. So they're already in that mindset of not eating a lot, and so what really triggers them is getting a big bait in front of them. A lot of times they want one singular big meal throughout a day or 2 or 3 days, and that's what's going to fill them up so they can go back and chill or even suspend, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to throw one of these bigger baits to really get some of those bites. So once I throw that jerkbait and find an area that those fish are using, I'm going to pick up this big swim bait. This is a Magdaft. This is a 5-inch, by the way, and I am going to catch a couple bigger bites. The key to this bait is having the right conditions, though. I'm not going to throw it if I don't have the right conditions. The first one could be overcast. Now, this could be any of these conditions. It doesn't necessarily have to be all 3, but I look for overcast, I look for wind, and I look for dirtier water. If I have all 3 of those, awesome. If I get one of those, I'll still throw it. If I like at least 2 of them though. If it's overcast and I have dirty water, awesome. Dirty water does kind of trump the other 2, because if they can't see the bait coming, then it's not calm enough for them to get spooked by it, you know. But unless you have like a super sunny flat calm day, then it might suck. But I really like dirty water when I'm throwing this. If it's clear water, then you want either overcast, wind, or both. That's going to be the keys to throwing this bait. But this is a bait I love to throw because it gets me those bigger than average size fish. And I use this for largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass. It doesn't matter. I've caught 14-inch bass on this bait. It's something that shouldn't scare you away from throwing it, and once you get one bite on this sucker, you will be hooked for the entire day. I promise you. The bites are so violent on this thing, it can be so much fun. But that is the second bait that I'm going to reach for when I'm fishing in the month of February. Now, bait number 3, I kind of hinted at it when I talked about what those fish do after they eat when they go and suspend. The bait that I'm going to keep on my deck is also going to be a Damiki rig. I've done a lot of videos about this. If you guys haven't seen them, go back on the channel and check that out. But a Damiki rig really shined for me last year, and I really learned a ton about it, and it caught some critical fish and some absolute giant fish for me. I had a Toyota Series event in the month of March, so not February, but March, on Dale Hollow Lake, which is a world famous lake, and I caught some giant largemouth and smallmouth on this little guy in 40 feet of water. It was absolutely insane, and I ended up utilizing this bait through the rest of the year, but this bait really shines in these cold water months because what happens is as those fish are getting closer into the spawning pockets, a lot of times they're still chasing bait. So if you get in an area and you look around and you go, oh my gosh, you're looking on your fish finder and they are lit up because of how much bait there is in the area, that's when I'm going to pick up one of these little guys, especially when it's deeper than I can throw anything else. Because this sucker is just a jig head with a Zman minnow on there, I can fish this thing super deep. So what that allows me to do is look at some of the bait fish and go, oh, those bait fish are in 30 feet of water. I don't know how else I could reach that but with this. You could catch them with a swim bait too, but that Damiki rig is a super finesse way that you can catch them with all different conditions. I don't necessarily have to have wind or rain or anything like that. As long as I can see those fish around that bait, I can catch them on a Damiki rig. Now this is also going to catch me a lot of fish, but you can also catch absolute giants on this bait. So if I'm getting into an area that I think those fish are going to spawn and I'm idling out deep and all of a sudden I see a bunch of bait fish, that's when I'm going to pick this bait up. So don't sleep on this bait. But now we're going to get on to number 4. So guys, if you're liking the video so far, go ahead and hit that like to show your love for the video. But now we're on to number 4. Number 4 is one that I am sure is not going to surprise absolutely anybody here. It is going to be a jig, particularly a football jig or a pitching style jig, because everybody knows a jig gets bigger than average bites. But the key to this bait, and the reason I like throwing it, is most people are power fishing still. So you'll see guys throwing chatterbaits, you're throwing lipless baits. Carl Jacobson does it best when he fishes some of the heaviest traffic areas on Lake Gunnersville, which is a world-renowned lake, with a jig. Because these people are getting into these areas and fishing it so fast, you can slow down with a big fish bait like this and really put some key fish in your boat. Because like I talked about with the swim bait, some of the biggest fish of the year are pulling up. They're starting to get that hint that the days are getting longer. I need to start getting up there and getting ready. So later in the day, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to some of these areas and I'm going to pick up this big jig, throw that sucker out there, and I'm going to drag it along the bottom. I like to pair it with a beaver style bait. I like a reaction innovation beaver. It has a good fall to it. It drags really subtly. A palmetto bug also does a great option when you cut both of those down. The palmetto bug will actually keep it standing up a little bit. That's one thing I like about that bait, and it lasts forever. But the key for this for me is finding those areas that those fish are transitioning to and from. So when I'm getting on those bluff wall sections or I'm getting into areas that are super popular for fish to transition through, that's when I'm going to reach for a jig. Because this is a time of year where all bodies of water act like a tidal fishery. That's right, you heard me right, I said a tidal fishery. You have new fish constantly coming to you. So once you find a pre-spawn area where those fish are transitioning up, staging, that's also going to be a post-spawn area most of the times. So you can actually use some of the same spots you find in the month of February and the month of July, June, because those fish are just going to go in and come back out, and you have the point. So keep some of the areas that you find in mind, and you can catch them on a jig now, and you can also catch them on a jig later, but just be sure you have a jig on your deck. So the last bait that I want to talk about is a personal favorite of mine. It is always on my deck. It is no surprise probably, and that is going to be a chatterbait. The big secret to me though is I don't like throwing a jackhammer this time of year. I throw specifically Zman Chatterbaits because I just love Zman Chatterbaits, but this time of year I'm throwing a Chatterbait Elite for the reason that it runs straighter than a jackhammer does. So this time of year fish like to track baits, and they're not as pressured, so I don't have to trick them with as much reaction as I do when the summer months roll around. Once, you know, those fish have been up shallow for a while or the pre-spawn has been over, like in the month of April, those fish have seen a chatterbait over and over again, and you really have to start doing some goofy stuff with your chatterbait in order to catch those fish. But this time of year, if you're just slow winding that chatterbait, they'll still come up and absolutely gag on it. And so that's why I like a Chatterbait Elite, because it runs straighter and I can fish it more efficiently down specific types of cover, and I can fish it slower without having it get hung up as much, because when I make a cast, I know exactly where it's gonna go. Now when I fish a chatterbait, I'm gonna look for the same transition areas that I was looking for with that jig, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look up a little bit shallower. This time of year, if you get a warm day or if you get any wind, those are the banks that I'm going to be targeting with a chatterbait. Because you get a warm day with some wind, it's going to push some warm water up, and that'll really help bring those fish up. And this is a secret that I don't tell most people. There's always a population of fish that live shallow. That's right. 5 foot or less all throughout the year. Even in ice period like I have up here, you can still find a population of fish that live shallow. So what I will do with this is I will go into areas that are popular spawning areas to try to catch some of those fish that are up there early. Look at some isolated cover, try to hit that stuff that's underneath the water that nobody sees, but this is a bait when it's cold and those fish are getting ready to pull up that you can still catch some absolute giants on. As always guys, all the stuff that I've talked about today will be linked below, but thank you guys so much for watching. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.